We've been here doing this for 14 years.
The last 5 felt like 20.
On a chilly September morning, Richard Rawlings stood in that courtroom, still sporting the self-assured grin that people were familiar with from Fast and Loud. However, something shifted when the judge read the punishment. His knees gave way. In front of the cameras, the man who had built a kingdom flipping Mustangs and boasting about million-dollar deals crumbled, gripping the rail. As it turned out, the king of cars had built his kingdom on a darker foundation, and the brutal truth would have silenced a crowded courtroom. People watched as Rawlings was dragged away with his eyes down as security stepped in. On this day, America's most reliable auto guy turned into its most sought after. However, how did Richard Rawlings go from being a hero to being in handcuffs? The king of cars, Richard Rawlings, entered an old garage on a quiet street in Dallas where the sun was already scorching. He stared at dusty car frames and shattered windshields as if they were gold waiting to be unearthed. This marked the start of Gas Monkey Garage. If you've ever watched Fast and Loud, you undoubtedly recall Rawlings calling deals over the phone while his team hurried to complete projects, leaning over engines with that comfortable confidence. With rock music playing in the background and high-definition footage, you could say it was the American dream in action. Richard, who was born in 1969, claimed to have sold thousands of cars after he began flipping them long before TV crews followed him around, enough to create a small empire that smelled like motor oil and barbecue by opening a restaurant, a pub, and eventually a live music venue. For 8 years after its 2012 debut, Fast and Loud attracted viewers who wanted to see rust buckets turned into six-figure auctions, with Richard shaking hands, lighting cigars, and speeding off in a vehicle loud enough to wake the neighborhood. At its height, Fast and Loud was one of the most popular automobile shows on the Discovery Channel, drawing millions of viewers each episode and making Richard a household name among those who didn't even give a damn about cars but enjoyed the rush of victory. Wearing gaudy shirts, arriving at meetings in vintage Mustangs, and referring to himself as the king of cars with a smile that suggested he could get away with it, Richard played the part flawlessly. And he did, in a lot of ways. Gas Monkey Garage grew. Richard's Instagram was loaded with pictures of jets and people supporting him at auto shows, and establishments bearing the Gas Monkey brand appeared in various places. Offering everything from merchandise to beer, he became the face of the contemporary American car-flipping hustle by partnering with Dodge and making an appearance at SEMA. He created a persona that stated, "You can live like this too if you work hard and move quickly." Even while his staff worked long hours behind the scenes, rushing against deadlines that the program frequently ignored, Richard made the life of flipping automobiles and sipping beer seem glamorous. However, were you acquainted with Richard Rawlings? Although you watched him throwing parties in the shop, closing last-minute sales, and giving his workers high fives, the truth behind that TV persona was much less glamorous. After Fast and Loud ended in 2020, Richard's empire encountered difficult times, as the slash-gear analysis of his post-show life reveals. Following the closure of Gas Monkey Bar and Grill, the brand's enthusiasm subsided, and followers observed Richard moving his attention from the garage to new endeavors that weren't always successful. He started a YouTube channel, worked on automotive projects that lacked the high-stakes excitement depicted in the TV show, and attempted to maintain the brand. Richard was still there, flipping and chatting loudly, but the protecting glow that shielded him from criticism had vanished along with the cacophony of Fast and Loud. People began to wonder how much of Fast and Loud was authentic, how agreements were reached, and whether the automobiles manufactured under time constraints for filming were as sturdy as they appeared in the studio. In forums, rumors about unpaid payments and difficult business calls began to surface. Richard's reputation as the unstoppable king of cars started to deteriorate. And that brings us back to the rumor that went viral on late-night TikToks and YouTube shorts, which claimed Richard had been sentenced for a Mustang scandal. Although this story was untrue, it seemed plausible because it was difficult to distinguish between his self-assured TV persona and the difficulties facing the brand over time. As you can see, Richard Rawlings promoted the idea of turning rust into gold. But the realities of doing business in the automotive industry are much more convoluted, with harsh statistics, taxes, and legal documents that don't make for compelling television. But in the perspective of the internet, how did America's most reliable auto guy become into its most sought after? In actuality, the fissures in this flawless facade began with a straightforward tax audit, and the findings of that audit raised issues that the film crew was unable to resolve. The unraveling. This flawless facade began with something as basic as a tax examination. An IRS agent opened a folder bearing Richard Rawlings' name in the spring of 2023, anticipating another routine review of a well-known businessman's financial records. Rawlings, the well-known figure from Fast and Loud, had established a reputation for frequent victories, spectacular flips, and gatherings where people cheered for Gas Monkey Garage. However, the figures did not reflect the way of life. The documentation for a custom Mustang sale contained an unusual VIN, and an expense line for repair parts appeared overly tidy. It appeared to be a misprint at first, maybe a number flipped, one letter off. However, the record bounced back, and the system marked it as non-existent when the investigator compared the VIN to federal databases. This was a VIN associated with a car that didn't actually exist, not just an incorrect number on paperwork. The vehicle was painted a vivid metallic blue, driven to auto events where spectators flocked for pictures, and shared on social media with captions commemorating a six-figure flip. It was also shown as a rare Mustang construction. Supporters recalled seeing Richard behind the wheel, grinning for the camera, revving the engine, and declaring that this would be the car that broke auction records. In order to double-check Richard's transactions, the IRS started communicating behind the scenes with state motor departments and the Department of Transportation. As they dug deeper, they discovered more discrepancies between sales records and restoration claims. Parts expenses filed under business deductions appeared without receipts matching the builds presented on his channels, and cars that should have required emissions testing and registration fees were lacking such records. During a casual shop tour, Rawlings posted a video to YouTube that featured a clean and immaculate Mustang sitting under bright shop lights. As they panned over engine parts, Richard and his team laughed in the background and called out the next project. But when investigators stopped the video and looked at the VIN plate that was visible in the frame, they found that it did not match any known restoration documents that had been submitted to Texas records. Even seasoned investigators would be shocked by what they discovered next. A closer look revealed that the vehicle was constructed from a salvaged shell. Nevertheless, the documentation was submitted under a different title, avoiding the fees and inspections that would have been necessary for a genuine high-value development. Once a mainstay of Richard's social media empire, this Mustang became the thread that started to bring everything to an end. The IRS discreetly started a federal inquiry into potential tax fraud, concentrating on company deductions made under Gas Monkey holdings, show-related goods sales, and revenue from foreign appearances that may not have been properly reported. Further concerns regarding the accuracy of customs and export statements were raised by a trail of money connected to foreign auctions and individual collectors who bought refurbished autos. Rawlings had been openly claiming for years that he flipped hundreds of cars per year, but the audit found flaws, with some transactions lacking the documentation required under federal law. Every sale, transfer, and social media post that included a car with a clear plate or VIN tag was pieced together behind closed doors by a team of detectives. In order to cross-reference timestamps with invoices that Richard's companies filed with the IRS, they extracted snippets from YouTube videos, Fast and Loud episodes, and even Instagram reels. What began as a straightforward examination of tax returns developed into a comprehensive federal inquiry that involved investigators going to auctions, speaking with former purchasers, and looking through documents that Richard most likely thought would never be seen. The man who became well known for turning rust into gold suddenly
had to deal with a different reality in which
every little thing counted, and every missing receipt may result in legal action. Fans trusted the king of cars to deliver builds on camera while lighting cigars and cracking jokes, but he was being investigated by the federal government. The Mustang with the fictitious VIN came to represent a system that was beginning to fall apart on the inside. But even Rawlings' closest associates were unaware of what lay behind those guarded doors. The secret empire. What we are searching for is hidden in what Gas Monkey employees once referred to as the cage. To most visitors, It appeared to be just another parts storage area in the back of the Dallas warehouse, filled with boxes with handwritten tags, crates of carburetors, and old panels. However, detectives discovered what they subsequently described as a modest industrial-grade counterfeit lab behind a false wall. Federal authorities had discovered this secret area as a result of the audit that began with a single fictitious VIN. On a muggy morning, they pushed past racks of dusty rims and stepped over shattered floor tiles before arriving at a large metal door with a warrant. High-end laser etching equipment, blank VIN plates, and printers that could create registration stickers, so convincing they could pass any cursory scrutiny, were discovered inside. Files with original VIN data taken from salvage yard purchases and ledgers indicating which identities will be given to which builds were located on a workbench made of scraped metal. This was identity theft on wheels, not just auto repair. Inside that cage, cars with dubious pasts, flood-damaged shells, or pilfered frames were given new identities and repackaged as spotless masterpieces that were prepared for auction. They may be presented as uncommon discoveries, complete with verified matching numbers that consumers blindly trusted. Federal officials later saw that the operation was so methodical that some VINs had passed through 3 or 4 states before returning to Texas under a new name, prepared for a public sale with the Gas Monkey brand behind it. One former technician described how he was instructed to just grind off the old and let the new plates do the talking, thinking it was part of routine restoration. The witness testimonies from former employees who had remained silent for years, thinking that what happened in the cage was just shop business, made the discovery even more startling. Another reported witnessing sizable cash payments made after hours when private collectors picked up particular buildings without ever filing any official paperwork. Glimpses of this covert operation were inadvertently captured in footage from Richard Rawlings' own YouTube postings. In one film, Richard joked about secret projects we can't show yet, while guiding viewers through a late-night shop session with camera lights catching a corner of the barred door. At the time, viewers believed this to be a tease for a new build, another Gas Monkey exclusive. Investigators, however, examined the identical clip and identified the keypad entrance and stronger hinges, markers they had previously seen in shop images provided by whistleblowers. It wasn't small scale either. Subsequent reports showed that in just 2 years, more than 50 cars had gone through this system, with earnings estimated to be in the millions. While off-camera projects were filtered through this covert system, allowing the operation to go unnoticed, cars restored on camera frequently had spotless paperwork. The cage turned into the command center of a plan that satisfied the brand's desire for unusual construction and large sales, while generating a secret cash stream that was never acknowledged. Taxed or questioned by consumers who trusted the Gas Monkey brand, federal prosecutors became involved in the case because of this. Richard Rawlings, once known as the King of Cars, became the focus of a criminal inquiry that extended well beyond a single Mustang with a forged VIN. When the evidence from that little secret room, where the mystique of Gas Monkey crossed with the reality of federal law, came to light, the reputation that had been established on quick trades and flash builds collapsed. When someone inside the store turned on Rawlings and gave investigators the last piece of evidence they needed to close in, the plot reached its zenith with one terrible betrayal. The ultimate betrayal. It began when a European collector thought he had discovered his ideal vehicle at Gas Monkey Garage after years of looking for an authentic Shelby GT500. Telling tales of American roads and the car's illustrious history, Richard Rawlings himself had shown him through the shiny silver paint and meticulously detailed engine bay. In exchange for what he believed to be a piece of history, the collector wired $1.2 million. It was a handshake transaction and a promise sealed with an Instagram snapshot. However, the item he purchased was a ghost. The car's true history was hidden below layers of polished metal and eye-catching advertising, and the VIN and documents were fabricated. Customs highlighted the documents when the collector attempted to register them in his nation, which led to a diplomatic phone call that would span the Atlantic. An international client became a whistleblower as a result of this call, providing emails, receipts, and voicemails that demonstrated how Rawlings' world had transformed trust into a weapon that turned clients into victims. Nobody is safe when trust is used as a weapon. And it was this betrayal that gave the prosecution the last key they required to unlock all of Richard Rawlings' sealed doors. However, how did he manage to get away with it for so long? The TV show weapon. The solution was right in front of millions of viewers every week. For Richard Rawlings, Fast and Loud was more than simply a television program. It was the ideal marketing tool. The search for rare muscle vehicles, the stress of last-minute deadlines, and the unveiling of the roaring engines under shop lights were all dramatized in each episode. The aim was that everything appeared authentic. In one episode, Rawlings would flaunt a recently restored Mustang while discussing heritage and authenticity as though the camera were a confessional. Behind the scenes, however, the documentation revealed stories that never occurred on the road, and the VIN numbers on those frames weren't always what they appeared to be. Every episode turned into a sales pitch, every dramatic barn find into a sales funnel, and viewers who relied on Rawlings' on-screen persona were unintentionally entering a meticulously constructed world where it was difficult to distinguish between real transactions and TV drama. Every episode served as proof, every discovery was made up, and the program itself served as a barrier that allowed Rawlings to gain the faith of an eager-to-believe audience. Additionally, the demand for the cars he transferred through Gas Monkey Garage increased along with the ratings, providing him with the cover to carry out transactions that would ultimately be crucial to his demise. The empire fell apart the moment the truth was revealed. The collapse. Richard Rawlings' Gas Monkey Garage had been a car culture magnet for more than 10 years, drawing visitors in with its roaring engines and pressing deadlines beneath hot shop lights. However, the empire he had spent over a decade creating was destroyed in 72 hours. It all began with a collector posting receipts that didn't match the purported history of a Shelby GT500 in a classic vehicle forum. The papers Richard handed up to the camera in previous Fast and Loud episodes, the VIN tags, and the repair timelines were all immediately scrutinized. By that afternoon, the boards had become archives of auction pictures and episode timestamps. Viewers rewatched parts, stopping frames to compare documentation and chassis, stamps with public records that revealed quite different information. Industry? Insiders who had previously pursued Gas Monkey collaborations started to back out of their agreements. Vehicles connected to the garage were flagged by auction houses. Within 24 hours, sponsors who had associated their brands with Richard's bold, Texas-style charisma began subtly removing logos from websites and removing social media posts. Discovery, which had previously been the loudest supporter, removed banners from its streaming pages and issued a brief statement distancing itself from Richard's activities and stating it was reviewing content strategy. Additionally, the cost of cars with Gas Monkey origin dropped practically instantly on the classic car market. Collectors started phoning one another to inquire about paperwork and whether they had examined the frames for hidden stamps and welds. Some realized their valuable assets were in danger of losing all of their value when they discovered secret numbers that didn't add up. Others saw liens attached to vehicles they believed to be their own. As collectors rushed to sell or verify authenticity, the market trembled. Years of empire building crumbled beneath the weight of receipts and paused film frames in just 72 hours. The whole world of vintage cars seemed to awaken and remove the Instagram filters from what they believed to be true, realizing that Gas Monkey Garage's empire had been built not only on smoky burnouts and high-octane edits, but also on a foundation that was crumbling under the most obvious truth. People were finally asking questions. What is Richard's worst part? Every Fast and Loud frame that had once contributed to his legend was now being exploited to undermine it. After all was said and done, Richard Rawlings' case was more than a failure. It served as a mirror for a business that relies on glossy chrome and concealed fissures, demonstrating how simple it is to confuse assertiveness with sincerity. The lesson? Once trust is sacrificed for celebrity, it can never be recovered. And for years to come, the automotive industry will be affected. What other celebrities on television might be concealing sinister secrets?